Have you ever left a meeting thinking, I think that went well, and then nothing happened? No email, no follow-up, no clear no, just a strange quiet that suspiciously starts to feel like an answer. That's the universal sound of your idea being gently laid to rest, aka dying. The reality is most of us have learned to present and talk in this industry, but very few of us have learned how to listen to moments like that. Welcome to the Unspoken Yes, the podcast where we talk about advertising like it's a normal job. Even though we all know it's more like a mix of improv theater, corporate poker, and group therapy. I'm Roberto Platas, and I've spent a little over 20 years working in advertising, leading creative teams in different countries with different cultures, expectations, and ways of making decisions. I've been on the agency side, the leadership side, and the uncomfortable middle where most real work actually happens. And over time, I realized that what really shapes ideas, careers, and outcomes in this industry is rarely what's said out loud. And that's the reason why we are here today. This podcast exists because there's a big gap between what we say in advertising and what actually drives decisions. We love frameworks. We love presentations. We love pretending that if we explain something clearly enough, the outcome will make sense. It won't. Real life doesn't work like that. Ideas don't move forward because they are perfectly articulated. They move forward because the room feels ready. And most of the signals that tell you whether that's happening don't come wrapped in words. They come wrapped in awkward silences, polite nods, and the occasional "let's circle back." That invisible layer, the one nobody really names, is what we are going to explore here. And this first episode is about learning to notice it. Or, as I like to say, how to stop being the last one in the room to realize the meeting is over. What really shaped my way of looking at this didn't come from one office or one market. It came from having to do the same job in very different places. I started in Madrid, then I worked in Dubai, later in Bangkok, and eventually in Detroit. 4 markets that forced me to relearn how decisions are made every time. Different accents, different rules, different expectations, but one thing stayed surprisingly consistent. The most important moments rarely happen during the presentation itself. They happen right after, in the pause before the first comment, in the way someone leaned back, in whether the conversation opened up or quietly closed. Let me tell you, nothing says this idea is dead like a room full of people suddenly very interested in their phones. Over time, one thing became clear. Creativity doesn't live in isolation. It lives inside context, relationships, power dynamics, and of course, timing. And if you ignore those elements, even great ideas struggle to survive. That's why everything in this industry eventually circles back to one thing: the yes.
Sir, yes, sir!
The yes to a direction, the yes to an idea, the yes that unlocks production, budgets, and momentum. But that yes almost never arrives cleanly. It's not announced. It doesn't stand up and introduce itself like, "Hello, good morning, my name is Yes, Unspoken Yes." It behaves more like something you're trying to track without seeing it directly. You sense it before you hear it, and you feel it before it's confirmed. Sometimes it shows up as progress, sometimes as hesitation that doesn't turn into rejection, and sometimes it hides behind phrases that mean absolutely nothing until you learn how to read them. Like, this is interesting, which, as we all know, is corporate for this is f***ing terrible. And this is where silence becomes important. In meetings, we are trained to listen for words, approval, objections, clear feedback, but silence is doing just as much work. A pause can mean interest that needs time. It can mean discomfort that hasn't found language yet. It can also mean resistance that's being polite. Or in some cases, it means I'm mentally drafting my resignation letter. And here's the part that took me years to accept. Leaving a meeting without an answer is not always a failure. In many cases, it's a warning to slow down and pay attention. Because a rushed yes, one that hasn't settled properly, tends to come back later as a much harder no. Silence forces you to read the room instead of the slide deck. And that's a skill most of us were never trained to develop. Mostly because no one wants to admit that half our job is guessing what people really mean. I didn't really understand this until I started working outside Spain. Being in different cultures forced me to confront how wrong my assumptions were. In Dubai, silence wasn't something to fix. It often signaled respect or careful consideration. In Bangkok, agreement wasn't always immediate. Sometimes it lived in timing and hierarchy rather than direct response. Same silence, different meanings. What changed wasn't the work, it was the context around it. And once you see that, I'm telling you, you can't unsee it. You realize that finding the yes isn't about pushing harder. It's about understanding what kind of room you're in and what the room needs before it can move. That's the perspective I want to bring into this podcast. Whether you are aiming for an international career or working with 5 different personalities in the same office, these dynamics are already shaping your work every day. So this podcast is not about decoding people. It's about paying attention. About noticing the moments we usually rush past because they don't feel productive or concrete enough. In the next episodes, we'll talk about how to recognize momentum before it's confirmed. Why, sure, let's try that, can mean completely different things depending on who says it. And how modern tools have made silence louder, not quieter. Because advertising isn't really about ideas. It's about people navigating uncertainty together. Often without the language to explain what they are feeling. And that's where the Unspoken Yes lives. If this resonated, follow or subscribe to the podcast and stay with me for the next episode. Each one builds on the last, and this conversation only works if it unfolds over time. Unless, of course, you are the type who skips to the last page of a book. If you want to keep the dialogue going between episodes, you can also find me on LinkedIn. That's where I share thoughts, questions, and reflections as they come up in real life, not just when an episode drops. No magic, no big promises, just a quieter way of paying attention to what's already happening around you. And remember, if they are not saying no, they are not saying yes either. See you soon. Stay in my lane.